this path. Souls burning from coals left behind from others. Fires in your hearts don't fall apart. You called it your revolution, it's just begun. But you've been here before. Don't you recognize the eye of the storm? 'Cause every revolution ends where it begins. Like a corkscrew you wound down, buried yourself in the ground. Revolution became your grave. You said it's on its way. But you've been here before. Don't you recognize the sign on the door? 'Cause every revolution ends where it begins. And it's red, white, and white, and you will find all trajectories eventually point north, point north. You've arrived to where you're from. It was always here for you. It was always here for you. It was always here for you. 'Cause you are here. 'Cause you are now.
Thank you. That was a special treat by Nemo to open the show. Thank you for that. And I'm so excited for our episode today. We have Rich, our friend from the UK. So welcome, Rich.
Thank you very much.
Nemo. And this is New World Chaos.
Yeah.
I guess before we get to Rich, Nemo, is there anything you want to say before to open with?
That song is called Corkscrew. It's on my channel, Nemo Sundry, if people want the fancy schmancy version with more instruments. Yeah, before we went live, we started getting into some really good, juicy stuff. I opened up a can of worms. So I was kind of hoping we can kind of pick up where we left off with that. And Rich was kind of interested in themes around community, and we were talking about how isolation has been affecting people and some of the negative impacts of that. But Jeff, you mentioned that you see some of the new world we're moving into as potentially having opportunity to start new things. So that's kind of where I'm at with what we've been talking about. Rich, do you want to start with anything and just throw out what's kind of inspiring you, or say anything about yourself that you want the world to know?
Not really, but I will throw a spanner in the works straight away. So I'll totally derail us and ask you, Nemo. So that's one of your own songs. You wrote that, yeah?
Mm-hmm.
Sweet. I want to know is what the live music scene is like with you guys, because I'm a musician myself, and I would love to know what the music scene is around where you live. Totally derailing it, but you inspired me, so tough.
Not necessarily. I think it fits perfectly. So if I look kind of bigger picture and not necessarily just recent times, going to open mics was something I did routinely. In 2018 and part of 2019, I went to an open mic once a week, sometimes twice a week. And I would just rotate around to a bunch of the places in the Twin Cities, and that's in Minnesota. And it was one of the best community environments I've ever experienced. I've had only a few select experiences in life where it's the community aspect has been profound. And it's like when people come together, it's the right people, it's the right place, it's the right time. And there's this spark that lights, and it's magic, and people can feel it. It's like something invisible in the air. It's incredible. And that's a really precious thing. So anywhere I discover that becomes immediately the most important place I can go. And with COVID restrictions, which were relatively strict here compared to other states in the US, there was not a lot going on throughout 2020 as far as open mics, but there were a lot of the summer protests. And so people started doing a lot of outdoor things. And I was still a mobile youth outreach worker at the time. So my job was mobile and a lot of times outdoors. So a lot of the activity in general was getting pushed outdoors, and people were trying to be creative with that. And there was certainly some benefits to it and a lot of chaos. And there was some negatives, and you kind of just had to go with whatever opportunities you could find. And now there are some open mics coming back around, and some places that are doing music, but with the COVID restrictions, a lot of businesses that did open mics, they closed down, and it's been pretty tough. And on top of that, there's these pockets of labor shortages because some people are getting paid to be unemployed, essentially. So I don't know, it's kind of chaotic, and it's hard to predict what on earth is really going on. So I just have to like get out of my house and see what's actually happening around me day to day, and try to find what opportunities are actually out there. And I don't think I'm the only one that's really craving some like in-person activity that's like has some sense of purpose and fun.
Yep. I don't go to live music. I have some hearing loss from college days, so I stay away from loud music and stuff like that. So I really couldn't say what the live music scene's doing here in Seattle. I don't know that there was much of a creative one earlier. It was kind of just the bar scene, but I don't know. Don't take my word for it. But I do know that during COVID, I was really impressed with the way people were using Zoom for doing live stuff. A lot of musicians were recording remotely, collaborating live, and so I like the kind of creativity that the pandemic brought out with live music. And we used to do a little open mic on the back porch for a while. Every Friday we'd have musicians come and play. Nemo came one night and played for us. So I had more experience with live music during the last year of the pandemic than I did any of the years before that recently. So, and it was all remote. So that's all my experience of live music.
Cool. I wouldn't want to assume your age or anything, but you to me, you said the magic word when I was growing up, and like kind of late teens and stuff.
Oh, because I'm not fully grown up yet.
No. It was Seattle. The magic word was Seattle.
I was born in 1970, and I turned 50 last year.
You do not look 50. You do not look 50. But
I've landed.
Because Seattle influenced the music scene around Seattle, the whole grunge thing influenced a big part of my childhood. And of course, you said that.
Oh yeah, early 90s
music. It was like, okay, so we're talking Pearl Jam, Soundgarden, Alice in Chains, Blind Melon. I'm missing some other ones. Lots of Soundgarden,
Nirvana.
Nirvana, obviously. Why didn't I think of them first? But they influenced a lot of my kind of worldview when I was younger. And so the moment you said that, I was like, ooh, excellent, Seattle. But yeah, I think, Nemo, you're on about the kind of the vibe that gets kind of, that can happen at gigs and live events and things like that. And any live event doesn't have to be music, but if the right circumstances kind of happen, then you really know it. It kind of speaks a lot to being in bands as well. If you get like 4 or 5 people that really, really get it, and some days you do, sometimes you don't. Yeah, whatever. But there's that kind of spark and there's that kind of connection, which goes back to our kind of topic of connective, like positive connections. And that then translates to a crowd. And you kind of get that feedback from them. And it's, I don't want to say it's an unspoken connection because you're actually performing music and there's that kind of interaction as well. But you feel that connection, and that's really, really amazing. I don't want to get too esoteric on this, but there's definitely something about, and this goes back to our original topic of like kind of human connection and kind of building like relationships and things like that. There's definitely something completely different of meeting somebody face to face and then talking to somebody over Zoom. Can't quite put my finger on what that is exactly, but there's something different. There's a body language. There's something you can't put your finger on. But yeah.
Yep. I think that is really important. And yeah, I'm not really as nearly as motivated to interact with people online and say through even Zoom as I am in person, especially as an extrovert. At least the technology factor, it's like, I know that I'm talking to a computer screen essentially, and I can interact with you guys as, much better through this screen than any time in history. So that we're getting as close as we possibly can to this being in person, essentially like teleporting. But there is that thing that's like this invisible barrier that makes it seem not quite as real. And I really have noticed that some of the ways that some people around me act and react to life it's as if life is unreal to them, that there's a lack of realism. And I can tell, say, some examples are a lot of people around me, it doesn't seem like they feel their vulnerability very much, which is a fundamental part of being alive. So it doesn't seem like they're feeling that deeper sense of being like physically present and just the literal reality that you're vulnerable. Like you can be affected by your environment. You don't really have power over most things that happen around you. And we're all on this giant rock that's spinning around really fast in the middle of empty, cold space. And we're kept alive by this giant burning ball of fire millions of miles away from us. And I guess I get pretty esoteric about this stuff, but like I keep in mind the bigger picture and like having this physical connection to feeling that vulnerability. It's like literally feeling alive. And it seems like some of the people around me, when they're struggling with isolation and disconnection and just like being online all the time, it's like they're living in the Matrix. They don't realize that they're not feeling very much. It doesn't seem like it.
I was going to bust out the Matrix metaphor. You beat me to it. Never mind. What you said about the kind of being interacting with people online. By the way, I will gesticulate a lot. I'm really sorry if it messes up with the camera or anything.
Fuck with my hands.
Jazz hands. I lost me now. So when you're interacting with people online, you said there's like an invisible kind of barrier. And what you're describing about how some people interact with the real world, it's like, for me, this is my observation, that invisible barriers come with them. And it's look at it, they're kind of have that invisible film over their eyes that doesn't quite help them click with reality. There is a big downside to that. I can see that, excuse me, that online, a lot of people don't seem to have boundaries of just good manners, just being like a classic, I guess, in this context of just being a gentleman. I know that's an outdated concept, don't cancel me, but it's just that kind of good manners that seems to be lacking online, and the feeling that you're anonymous online in certain like forums and things like that, and you can say whatever you want. And the danger is of that, and we've seen it, from the past year and a half, I'm definitely sure we've all seen it, that seeping into real life as well. And that's the big danger. But don't get me wrong, there are positives, and I'm sure we'll get onto those in a moment. But yeah.
Positives from COVID? Like that we're going to see as we emerge? Is that what you meant?
Yeah. And as we were talking about before, is the kind of positives of this sort of us getting us as in a kind of a whole, getting more used to interacting like this through the internet. And this is just second nature now. And I'm talking to you guys. How far away you are from me, I wouldn't like to guess. I wouldn't be able to work it out anyway. I'm not that way. I'm not wired that way to be able to work it out. That's a positive. Being able to speak to you guys, being able to connect how we have via the different kind of Discord channels and stuff like that. That's a positive. That's an amazing positive. We can chuck my ideas around the grand kind of scheme, philosophical dream of the marketplace of ideas is real. It's here. And that's a positive, I think, anyway. I hope it's positive. We'll find out. We are still very much in, I think, and the young people that I work with are still very much test subjects in this kind of experiment that is social media, in my view anyway. And we've yet to see what the results are. And it's a bit scary.
Yeah. I do agree that the etiquette has changed. Social media has changed the etiquette, especially in the younger generation. And I noticed that in the mid 2000s when I was teaching, and that's when cell phones started to make their way into the schools. And that's about like mid 2000s and after on into the 2010s is when I started noticing the etiquette, the social awareness. And I'm on the autism spectrum, so mine is not that strong to begin with. So for me to notice it has to be pretty significant. And I started noticing the manners and the etiquette of the generation of kids I was teaching and younger. And about that time as well. And that's the time that the technology started to become mobile and smart.
Well, I want to bring in something I reference fairly frequently. Now, I know people, when they're trying to speculate as to the cause of some of the negative changes in younger generations, such as statistic, for example, pretty much, I would say 10 different categories of measurement for psychological dysfunction or, say, a negative trait or lack of development. Pretty much a whole list of categories here. Those issues have skyrocketed in like the last 30 years. They actually been going up for quite a while, like since the 60s. And it went from going up noticeably to then spiking. And I do think, the internet has an effect, but I want to put it in a bigger context. And I think the context generally is childhood sheltering. These two separate changes in society happened at almost the same time. And it was roughly in the 80s. And not everybody who grew up in, say, the 80s is going to realize this, nor did they experience it. But by the 90s, this was very common. And by the 2000s, mostly when I grew up, that it was like the norm, widespread. Like how much childhood sheltering has taken off to a very extreme degree. And if you think about it, if your entire world as a kid is controlled and yet you have the power of the internet, that's like the one area you have where you can enter these whole new worlds and actually explore and play and be free and make your own choices. The internet was basically our escapism, but we didn't intend to use it as escapism. We used it to live a life that felt meaningful and actually be able to make choices and make our own friends and not just be prisoners in our families' houses. So I want to put that in context, because we're seeing adults that grew up like that. I was one of them, but I rejected it and I hated it. So like I completely left it behind and I transformed drastically as a person. And that healing took a lot of effort and it took a long time and it was painful. It wasn't a pleasant experience, but a lot of people are stuck in the after effects of that, and they're antisocial, and their capacity to deal with risk and change is very limited. and they seek comfort and an extreme level of safety. And those tendencies are making it hard for people like me and say Jeff, and probably even Rich, to actually pursue the goals we want to build more authentic, self-determined, empowered communities.
What do you think made the difference? Like, what caused the change, the shift in the parenting style? Was there a baby book somebody published, and the,
Well, I think that it was, to some degree, I think it's development of technology, and this might be
what
a
is that?
repeat pattern. This might be a repeat pattern. So when civilizations first start to develop, and now I'm going to be making some big generalizations, but it's really the best I can do. When civilizations start to develop, there's a lot of this interaction with the natural wilderness and hardship of just the wilderness around us. And so that tends to develop what we recognize as generally conservative values, or some variation on that. So people have to take on this insane amount of responsibility. They tend to form nuclear families or multi-generational families, some variation in that, to survive, and like traditional gender roles, that kind of thing. If we get far enough in building a society that starts to create an unprecedented level of opportunity and empowerment, the future generations start to change in their motivations. And I think one of the effects is that lack of natural struggle makes people seek comfort more than seek safety. And it's almost like it's a limited perspective. Like if I'm taking it down to the individual level, when I notice a person who's seeking hedonism and safety, to me, it's like they have a very limited view of what life is. They don't want to accept that there's risk, vulnerability, that sometimes natural disaster happens. They want to build this like safety net into the fabric of existence. And it's that pursuit that they don't want to accept is completely unrealistic. And I started to notice, like when I did some of the research, and other people have said this too, other researchers, that in the 80s, it was primarily driven by mothers that started to go to work more. Like that was a big trend, a big shift. It wasn't just, the fight for women's rights. It was, now it's having a serious impact on the workforce. And so they would put their kids in daycare, and there was a lot of fear in letting their kids go. And it actually created this kind of whirling around, this fear that just kind of took over. So there's like all these factors changing at the same time. I mean, I don't even know if I can really fully answer your question that easily, but
So parents started to panic at some point, and started to like over parent. And I want to address something. You keep throwing in hedonism, and you connected it with safety. But as a hedonist and somebody that considers it a positive value, I want to clarify its connection with safety in that context. You said escape into hedonism and safety.
You want me to clarify that? Well,
you said that just now.
Yeah, it's both. When they're together, when they're in relationship where a person is seeking safety as a form of hedonism, they're seeking comfort. And so they're avoiding, like say a person who, I've noticed people who have poor health since I overcame health issues, that a lot of people in poor health assume that exercise and healthy habits are always going to be miserable and depressing and full of pain and suffering, and food's going to taste terrible, and exercise is awful, and everything's pain. What they don't realize is that they never get far enough that their health actually changes and they feel better. So that's an example. And so they just avoid. And if you're avoiding that discomfort, then you're less capable of taking on life. And so they tend to seek safety in the world around them because they're less capable internally.
Maybe that's true. Maybe they like that individual person is less capable and has a sense of that and is seeking a level that's comfortable for them to function at.
Yeah.
I don't know. I've never been that. I'm not that person, so I don't know. I'm the opposite. I'm usually way out over the skis and not even realize it, and way in risky situations. I don't even know how I got myself there. Rich, I wanted to give you a chance to address.
It's something I want to add on with you. I just had to quickly look something up just to make sure I was actually going to get it right. But I grew up, so I was born in, when was I born? 78. So it was basically the 80s, 90s. I was kind of growing up and I had my real kind of, I guess you go through kind of like school age, young school age. I know it's different for you guys in America. I learned the other night it's K through 12, isn't it? That's your kind of school year. Yeah, I've learned that now. But so the most influential years of your life, so you're kind of at 12, 13, 15 when you're going through puberty, etc., if you do, or whatever. I can remember quite vividly that there was kind of a big storm about political correctness and things starting to get banned, or as we would call them today, cancelled. So what's happening is at the moment is nothing new. I know we were going to steer off this topic, but it's nothing new really. It's just at more of an extreme level. And so there was this kind of, I think she was a conservative pundit. I did bring up the webpage, but it's behind a paywall, so I'm going to just turn it off. There was a woman called Mary Whitehouse in England, and she was kind of like the forefront of this kind of nanny culture, political correctness. This is wrong. You shouldn't be watching this. I think one of the films that she was kind of going after at the time was Monty Python's Life of Brian. I don't know if you guys know that at all. And so basically my point is this kind of political correctness thing isn't anything new, and this coddling kind of behavior, it's been around for a while, and it's probably been around, I guess, with the I can't remember the name. Basically, the English dudes that come over to your country, really, really churchy people that kind of, I can't remember the name.
Puritans?
Anyway, Puritans. There you go. Thank you. So there was that kind of vibe going on even back then, and probably decades and thousands and centuries of years. So this kind of attitude is nothing new, but I think as Nemo, I think you pointed out, as technology has kind of increased and our comfort levels have got so much exponentially better, and they keep, I think Jordan Peterson, he does note, like there's a graph that kind of has got like the wealth on the bottom, and it's trying about straight line for like decades, centuries, and then suddenly it goes whoop, where everybody's kind of getting wealthier, even the poor getting wealthier at an exponential rate. So our lives are getting increasingly more comfortable, and it's kind of making us look for, I think, Nemo, and it's just a purpose, and there seems to be lacking in that purpose of what to do, what to complain about. I'm sure there's lots. I don't know where I'm going with that one.
I like where you're going with it, actually. Something that's like a big challenge for me is almost paradoxical. I'm a person that leans into discomfort and challenge and trying to do something like really purposeful that takes a lot of effort, because that's really satisfying to me. And I've been repeatedly, I would say the word is, disenfranchised from that really good struggle where it's something that's tangible and I'm with other people that are in that relevant context to the problem at hand that we want to solve, or the need we're trying to meet, etc. And I'll like put in so much effort just to be able to get to an opportunity like that in work, volunteer, other community groups, and you name it. I even moved across the country at one point for this. And I keep trying to get to those environments where it's like the rubber hits the road, and now it's like where the real work gets to happen. So it's tangible enough. It's like there's a big difference between the type of challenge you face where you know generally what needs to be done, and it just is going to take a lot of work and sacrifice, and it's intimidating, but it's tangible. That's the word. But I keep getting disenfranchised and pushed out more and more to the fringes. So a lot of what I want to do becomes really intangible because I'm getting isolated, and I'm not one of the people that self-isolates. So I've been trying to accept some of that reality that we're in as part of maybe the upheaval of how things are changing. And I'm changing the format of some of my goals to be more individualistic, and say, like with a lot of the youth mentorship I've done and in some of the nonprofit work around homeless and housing issues, I've decided I'm just going to research and try to expose some of the corruption. Is if they're not going to change anything or let me in and it's not sustainable, then I'm going to try to expose them from the outside. I think of that as kind of the Alexander Solzhenitsyn methodology. And I can do what he did a lot sooner. I'm not going to wait until I'm in a gulag.
One of the things we wanted to talk about was connection, and that's a good lead into it, because when you are feeling isolated, how do you connect? Like, what do you do to connect when you do need to connect to other people? What is your experience with that, or your method for connecting, or what have you found that works?
Well, I mean, for me specifically, I recognize my strengths and weaknesses, and I think I have almost no influence over people. And I do tend to, whether this is good or bad, I tend to provoke people, and oftentimes I don't even see it coming. So it's almost like walking on landmines. So I tend to expect that as part of reality, that the only time I'm going to have any influence is when I provoke somebody and they have a negative reaction. And so I end up having to deal with that. And besides that, I'm very extroverted and I'm very social and disagreeable, and I don't really have any fear or avoidance of vulnerable or ambiguous interactions or conflict, things like that. So I've tried to build up my skill around that stuff. And I then just try to be the first person to break the ice and like boldly put myself out there when nobody else is going to do it. And then I also try to look for where there are people who are already active doing something, and spend the majority of my efforts with the people where they show me signs clearly that they're motivated to do it, whatever that thing may be. And then I just kind of meet them where they're at, which is essentially how this podcast came to existence. Like, Jeff, you're one of the few people in the general sphere of like the counter movement to social justice that that's been proactive and reliable. And so I want to keep this podcast going. And it's like, let's see what we can do with this. So it's really just, I'm always trying to figure out like the secrets to how do you get to the right people, the right place, and the right time. I actually think so much of what I'm trying to do depends on understanding the answers to that. That's like magic.
My current plan, I can shed a little tiny bit of light on it. I find that the larger sample of people you have, the bigger chance you have. Like, if you go to your little small town gay bar with 30 people there that night versus you go to the gay bar in the city with 100 people there that night, your chances of finding someone is much bigger in the gay bar in the city. I know that much. So my plan right now is to kind of just bring in people, just people, bring them from all professions, all levels, just get the people here. And from that, together, even like we could help each other compare notes and troubleshoot and get insight, but somehow like find the people that we are looking for in a way that benefits everybody. Like we bring in all these people, we find the people we're looking for, but in the meantime, everyone's going to be finding their own people that they're looking for too. It won't just be us. So I just think the larger selection of people that we can somehow attract, that's the foundation. That's the key first step to all of it. So every little thing we do with the podcast, the Discord, the back porch, counterweight, the other thing is a little step to allow the people to show up and start using and building this community. And then we also talked about the in-person, like maintaining the virtual space, but then start branching out and finding ways to create the in-person real life space so we could get the in-person connections going too.
Yeah.
And I think that's the real difficult thing. Definitely see where you're coming from, Jeff, with the quantity. So meet as many people as you can. And if you meet somebody and you share how can I put this? A common moral understanding, maybe? That sounds okay? I think so. And you just click with them, and and that's when, for me personally, that's when I know that I have to kind of latch on, that sounds creepy, doesn't it? I need to keep connection with that person. If I recognize part of me in them, hopefully they do the same. And even if it's just that kind of proactive need to do things, to create, to like make things positive change, that's when I know that person I need to kind of like keep in contact with, and I need to develop that relationship, and that will build over time. When I did a bit of research for this podcast, and as I want to do, I go down rabbit holes, and one of the rabbit holes I went down was Aristotle.
Oh,
I'll quote Aristotle. Right, okay, I'm going to quote Aristotle now. I did write it down. In poverty, as well as in other misfortunes, people suppose that friends are their only refuge. And friendship is a help to the young in saving them from error, just as it is also to the old, with a view to the care they require and their diminished capacity for action stem from their weakness. It is also a help to those in the prime in performing noble actions, for two going together are better able to think and act like one. That doesn't make sense. I wrote that down wrong. Basically, he's saying friendships are helpful to everybody at every stage of their lives. But he's got kind of three prime understandings of, or philosophies behind friendship. And I'm going to paraphrase and kind of make this up as I'm going along. But there's the friendship of utility, which is like, say, a work relationship, for example. You can enjoy the time you spend together, but ultimately you are at a job, and that's what's bringing you together. And so if you move or you change jobs, then that connection with that person might go. There's friendships that could be based in pleasure, and I'm not talking about sexual relationships. I'm talking about things like hobby, sports, music, things like that. And as human, as humans, we kind of go through phases of what interests us. So in that way, our friendships change as well. So we could be in a group that's enjoying, like for me, I just started up my like live D&D sessions, which is awesome. And we can, we're just all the groups like really excited to get started again. But in 10 years, I might not want to do that. And then that friend group will change, and perhaps some of them will stay on, we'll still be friends, perhaps not, who knows? Now, I did write this down, so I'm gonna have to read it. The last one is the friendship of the good. This kind of relationship is based on mutual appreciation of the virtues the other person holds dear. This is what I was trying to get across with the similar morals. You kind of thought, oh, this person, I can connect with this person. Where are we? Common moral structure that bonds them can also coexist with accidental friendships. So going back up to like the work stuff and like the hobby stuff, this kind of like moral bond you have with somebody can like bleed over into like a work relationship as well. So you become really good friends with somebody that you work with, move on from the job, but keeping friends with that person. Yeah, and I thought that was really interesting, his kind of take. And like, how long ago was Aristotle around? Like 2,000 years, Greek philosopher. And some of that stands up today, really, in my personal view, that kind of friendship kind of philosophy anyway. And again, I've just lost completely where I was going with that. Something about the moral bond. Anyway, gone.
Is that the are you finding, is that the ideal friendship that you shoot for? Because you said when you meet different people, you'll notice something about a particular person. You recognize that you share a common moral framework or worldview, and then you'll intentionally, I guess, take steps to make sure that you maintain that connection, or based on this perception that you share a common moral framework. So is the moral type of friendship the one you found like most useful to aim for, or most?
It it's kind of a mixture, to be honest. So I'll take recent examples. As I said, that those things I've just described that kind of Aristotle went over, they merge together. He's stating them as very much this, isn't it? And it's like, well, I don't think that's quite how it works. Sorry, dude, but we all have our own opinions. But I think they all merge together into one. So say you meet somebody who is striving for similar goals as you, and you think, right, well, we can work together. And then as you talk to that person, you start to learn about their personal life, say, and like, oh, no way, I did that. I went there. No way, I went to that school as well. Oh, your brother does this. Sister, oh, isn't your dog cute? So that's how you develop those kind of friendships. Perhaps it starts on a common goal. Perhaps it starts on something as little as bumping into them in the street, although we can't bump into people in the street at the more social distancing. We're not allowed. But it can start as something as so simple to develop a deep and meaningful, long-lasting relationship and friendship, even social interaction. So yeah, it answers your question, sort of. It depends, but I'd say that was a good starting point to kind of have that moral connection.
There's layers to relationships, and there's different roles that relationships fall into. I think even in a really high quality community or whatever type of group it is, a business, a nonprofit, whatever, a church, if it's high quality, it's well developed, and everybody feels like really satisfied and empowered, there's going to be layers to the relationships. There's going to be consistency, and there's going to be variety. Like I think of, say, the communities I've been in that are really inspiring, those rare experiences. There are people that I don't know very well in those communities, but I'm still really glad that we're all part of it. And I think that I think a lot of people are alien to the idea of what it's really like to be part of an active, symbiotic, long-term community. And the longest community I ever had going on was like 3 years. Besides that, it's been very chaotic. And for me, the relationships I'm able to maintain, usually it's every couple years, I meet somebody that's like a rare person. We connect immediately on a very deep level. It immediately just goes to that otherworldly place. And we just know right away. It's as if the moment we meet, we've known each other our whole lives. And those are the people that, after all the years of the utter chaos and failures of my life, those people are the friends that stick around. But even then, because there's this lack of community foundation and there's so much chaos around us that tends to perpetuate itself, so the relationships I have don't really form a community. They're individual relationships, and we kind of make the best of it. But a lot of the life, like, it's almost like I'm living multiple lives in different worlds. So I'm dealing with that to try and make the best of it. But I find even the close friends I have, a lot of them are not interested in the things that I want to do in the world. So there's this constant, complete disconnect. So, and I'm sure I'm not the only person that deals with this. So I'm just trying to figure out, like, if more people are struggling with these things, then why aren't we coming together as people who are all struggling to experience the good friendship that Aristotle quote is describing? It's like there's something stuck that's not quite there yet for this renaissance, or whatever I want to call it.
I don't know. I moved from a very social extroverted culture to a very introverted culture about 10 years ago. And so that was the starkest contrast for me. It seemed cultural. Like, there are people doing everything you say all the time. They've been doing it for probably centuries. They're just in a different culture, in a different part of the United States. And so for me, I know exactly what you're saying, but I conceptualize it as the southern way of doing things, or the northern or Pacific Northwestern way of doing things. So it's more for me, finding the people that are compatible with the southern style or responsive to it, versus, and maybe avoiding the people that are the more Pacific Northwest introverted style, because that's where a lot of the clashes seem to happen. But I experienced the same thing. I just conceptualize it culturally because that's my experience of it. It didn't change until I crossed the regional line into a different culture, and then I noticed the same exact thing you're describing, but just on a different plane or axis, I guess. Rich, what's your experience with this? Our thoughts on?
I've got to say, some of my... No, I don't mind saying this at all. With regard to loneliness and kind of this... so a lot of my kind of disconnect with other people was, I think, self-imposed on my part. So I don't mind saying this on live to the world, woo, but I have my own issues with alcohol and certain drugs use, more alcohol really, or used to anyway. And that was a self-imposed kind of isolation for me. Whether or not it was conscious or not, I don't know. I was drunk most of the time, so who knows? But it very much dictated, that addiction very much dictated how much social interaction I had. And I wasn't like a go out and party to a pub drunk or anything like that. I was more like, I will stay at home, perhaps hang out with a few close friends, but that alcohol or whatever drugs was the escapism from reality that I think, Nemo, you were talking about living in multiple different realities. And that was definitely kind of the same sort of thing. So there was sober me, drunk me, and probably in between there was somebody I actually wanted to be. Now sober me's come up, I've really realized, please don't think this is big-headed, I've really realized who I have the potential to be now that I've not, it's been like nearly 6 years. So I really understand. And this goes back to kind of having that drive to create something, build something positive. I've really started to see that now in myself and think, when I see it in other people, I'm like, okay, I want some of that as well. Come on, let's do something. Let's get something done. But it's frustrating. I think, Nima, as you said, like, it's hard to find people, or at least stick with people that share those values, I guess, to generate something, to make something good. And I'm really lucky where I am at the moment that I've found certain groups of people to do that with. And then it's only getting better, because I've joined certain Discord groups. Are we allowed to name names? Can we say Counterweight? Can we say Crossroads? You're cool. I've just said them, so of course we are. And I've met so many people, like you guys, obviously, Neil as well. We had a little private Zoom meeting, and we were talking about certain things that we've been coming up with and different ideas. And he mentioned that he'd been to China and did martial arts over there. So I was like, oh wow, I love martial arts. I do Tai Chi. This is awesome. And so the conversation shifted gears then. So it went for something very business and kind of formal into completely talking about something different, and of talking about something we were both passionate about. It was nothing to do with the original conversation. It was absolutely brilliant. Again, I'm talking and not coming to a conclusion. But yeah, that's been my experience of like this kind of disconnect of friend groups, I guess, and things like that, and social interaction. Not sure if I answered your question at all, Jeff, but never mind. I'm sure it's fine.
I was electrified listening to you. Just that didn't sound big-headed at all to me. That sounded exactly like what we're trying to nurture here with the podcast of the community. I am so excited. I could feel the self-determination or whatever just bubbling out of you.
I do that a lot.
Let's do so. I agree. Let's do something. You're exactly the type of person I'm trying to find too, to do things.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
So and hopefully this project we have going, we can maintain it enough to actually see what we can do in the real world.
Yeah. Yeah, that was awesome, Rich. Like what you're
Exhausted
sharing,
myself.
it, I mean, I read this book that I just finished today and doing some of my research to expose some of the issues in the homeless and housing nonprofit industry in the US. That there's been some big problems where they're institutionalizing things that are very anti-empowerment, and it keeps people really trapped. And I was reading this book called Answers Behind the Red Door by Michelle Steeb. Steeb, yeah, I think that's her name, Michelle Steeb. And it's so straightforward, and the language is relatively simple, and it confirms a lot of what I already knew, both the good, the bad, and the ugly. And like you sharing about yourself, those experiences is reminding me of the stories that I was, the individual stories that she told in this book. So they're like case studies of individuals, and it's like going through their hero's journey to go into this program that refused to go with the tides of the whole industry and decided this one program's like, no, we're going to keep requirements for people entering this program to actually care about their own empowerment, and to put it in a nutshell. And so many of the stories would have one or a few moments that were really pivotal. It's almost as if it's like seeing a spark ignite out of nowhere. You don't know what caused it, you don't know where it's coming from, but it's as if all the right things came together and we're just watching as outsiders, and all of a sudden that spark ignites and that fire unleashes and it takes off. And it's that fire inside that drives that person. And as I'm trying to specify this understanding of what ignites that fire, intrinsic motivation, it's usually that they're in this environment, or they're put in an environment, sometimes that's well designed deliberately, not so that they're controlled or pushed into something, but that they choose to come there, they're drawn to it, and the environment is the right place that sparks that awakening. And there's these little seeds planted that leads this person to have, just even when they seem like they're really impoverished in this deeper sense, there's these little pieces where they have relationships, they have something, they have that bit of wisdom or that potential for wisdom in them that comes forward. And then they have somewhere buried in that mess their own instinct for autonomy and that desire for autonomy. And so like those little seeds, when it comes together, you don't even necessarily, you can't even see it as an outsider, but it happens. And it's just this beautiful transformation, this awakening. And they get that taste of that self-determination, and that little glimpse makes them this unstoppable person, this powerhouse that says, I am going to see through the rest of this for my self-determination and for everyone around me, and nobody's going to get in my way. That happened to me when I was a teenager, and I see it with these other stories. And no matter how much is against us, I still see it. I still see it as possible. And that's what I want to make happen in the world.
What happened as a teenager? Was it a specific incident,
well,
like epiphany that you remember? That
there was a number throughout my life, but my childhood was I was surrounded by an authoritarian culture. And it's not necessarily that every person was like that. It's just that the adults that were most controlling in my life, most immediate, like created that sense of it being very authoritarian, and I had almost no choices over my day-to-day life. It was like being micromanaged. It's like constant surveillance and control. And I started to get these glimpses of the outside world around the time I was 12, 13. When I was 12, I had this revelation. This teacher was yelling at a couple of us. She liked to decide who was the bad kids from the beginning, and she would just target us. Like she selected who she thought was bad, and she was pretty authoritarian. One time she was yelling at a bunch of us for something that didn't even happen, and I was just amazed at how much she was captured by her own fury and misery and this delusion of something that didn't even happen. And in the middle of her doing that, I had this realization Well, almost like the end of that movie Labyrinth with David Bowie, with that girl, where he has these magical powers, he controls that whole magical world, and she realizes something and she says it to him, and it was the same realization I had, and it was, you have no power over me. That there's something in reality that shows that the authoritarian belief of control is actually not real. You actually can't control other people.
Yeah.
So I've had things like that happen. Carry it away. What did you say, Jeff?
So from that point, you kind of had something inside of you that shifted, and you were more aware of the effect of authority and more determined to kind of find a way to counter it.
I acted from about that point forward as a teenager, like a younger teenager. I acted very independently. It was a shift from being rebellious to being independent, because rebellion holds in it the conviction that the other person actually controls you. So I think there's an evolution in a person's development to move beyond rebellion into autonomy or independence. I think that's a pretty common pattern for a lot of people. And some people don't get past that. So you can tell when you meet a person that's stuck in rebellion, that it's like, what are you rebelling against? It's almost like they have to create boogie monsters so they can continue to rebel. But
rebellion could be a potential marker of somebody that has potential for self-determination. I'm not going to find it today, but remind me on the next podcast. There's a quote I want to bring. I took a writing workshop, and it was a quote she read about what makes a good writer. And it was rebellious, arrogant, rude. It was like all these negative qualities, and it was everything you would never want to be, but that's the exact qualities that this author needed to do the kind of writing that they were doing. And so when she read that, I'm thinking, that's me. See, it has there's positive potential in it.
Yeah.
I have some thoughts. Actually, I have lived experience with some of the stuff you said that I want to share a little bit of. My experience with motivation, intrinsic motivation, is generally, I've found what you're to be saying is true, with the qualification that I don't think it works for everybody. I don't think you can create an environment and throw just anybody into it and they have this amazing transformation and they walk out self-determined. From the time I was 12 to about 16, 7th through 11th grade, I spent the summers at a residential school for the gifted. And it was exactly the type of environment that you described. It was this little crucible that they dropped us into, and it activated and nurtured all of the stuff you talked about. I just don't think it's something you could have dropped anybody into. I think there was some kind of potential in us to begin with that they identified and recognized, and there were qualifications we had to meet to get in, and testing and all of that. So they selected for people that had this to begin with, that were likely to benefit from this environment. And then they put us in, and everything you described did happen. I just think it's for a certain amount of people that are responsive to that type of setting, I guess. I don't think, I haven't found that you can create this one size fits all environment that you can. I guess the bottom line of all this is I'm much more skeptical of like the effect of environment over nature, or like there's something innate that has to be there first that the environment can kind of help along. But I don't think the environment itself is enough to instill, but I'm coming from a very specialized subset with a very specialized experience too. So I'm not speaking for the general population either. And Rich, I wanted to give you sorry, go ahead. And then I want to give Rich a chance to throw any last minute thoughts before we open it up to the audience.
Yeah, I guess, well, to attach an addendum to what you said, Jeff, actually the book I read that I referenced, Answers Behind the Red Door, emphasizes repeatedly the necessity for diversity of responses. So the focus of that book was on the homeless issue and this really destructive anti-empowerment program called Housing First. It's been implemented across the U.S. What?
Yeah, I've come across it in my work. I was kind of pro Housing First. I mean, it looked appealing to me, so we'll have to talk about it one day.
Well, yeah, we might have to specify, but the core of what I'm talking about in this book is the diversity of responses. And as I see it, when you build community serving programs, it's very self-referential, and there's almost like this meta layer to it where it builds the structure of the society itself. So those programs build foundation for other types of programs to then exist or come into existence. So there's this constant cycle, ideally, where you build certain programs and then there's an evolution and different types come into it, and there's a diversification, and there's also patterns that arise. And right now, we're kind of seeing the opposite, where there's so much authoritarianism and there's this real destruction of the foundation of these programs that it's making it really hard to come up with the variety that we need. But my whole point is to emphasize designing the environment with the intended audience in mind. And so there's so much variety in that, but it's a subversion. The whole point of it is that you're not trying to direct the people or convince them of anything, because they need to be in that experience where they have that spark or that aha moment on their own. So if you're playing with the environment, you'll notice how it affects the people.
Rich,
how you said we're opening up to, well, we got half hour left, is that right?
Yeah, I figured we'd open it to anybody else that usually nobody joins us, but okay. If anyone out there is watching and want to hop on, you can contact us through social media or email at jeffandnemo@gmail.com, and we can send you a Zoom link. Otherwise, we'll just keep chatting like we've been doing.
At this moment in time, I'm highly motivated to go to the bathroom. So if
you want to do that?
Mind, but
yeah, take a break, and then Nemo and I can chat for a while, and then you come back and chat with Nemo, and I'll go take a break.
But before I go, Nemo, you triggered something in me that's hardwired into my very soul. You mentioned the Labyrinth,
right? And David Bowie.
And David Bowie. So,
Babe?
Remember the Babe? What Babe? The Babe of the Power. What Power? The Power of Voodoo. Who do you do? What? Remind me of the Babe. I never got it out properly. That's just hardwired from primary school in me, because we did it as a play when we must have been about 8, 9, something like that. We did parts of it as a play. Right, I'm off to the bathroom. I'll be back.
Okay.
Oh, that's fantastic. That's great. Yeah, I watched that movie a lot.
It was what, 1980 or 81?
I don't know. It was 80 something.
I didn't catch it until later because I lived out the sticks. We had very limited media. 86. Wow. No, I don't know.
I didn't think it was early 80s. I thought it was mid 80s. I think it was, my sister was born in 85, and that was one of her favorite movies growing up. And I always thought putting David Bowie in tights with that ridiculous haircut was just goofy looking. It made the movie funnier. It's like he's this king of these goblins, and he's prancing around in tights, singing about "You Remind Me of the Babe," and it's just a very funny, bizarre, cool movie. Yeah, I knew this was going to be a good conversation today. I've been challenging myself to be disciplined and be on top of my shit. If I'm going to do anything. I like to have a morning routine, and then I'm trying to build an evening routine, like an end of night routine. And it doesn't take a lot of time, but I want to do it consistently. In the morning, I think that one's a little more important to me, but it's just like it's a nice way to start the day. So I've ignited the fire myself. Having bad health as a kid, now that I know what I can do that makes me feel good and really awake and creative, it's awesome. So I try to wake up at around 7:30 a.m. I try to wake up early. Just with the history of chronic fatigue, it's really nice to be fresh and early. I actually have grown to appreciate that. And I like to sometimes I'll get out of my house right away because it helps me wake up, and I get into the sunshine, the clouds, and I'll just jog around, just kind of whatever. Or I'll do yoga, and then I do the Wim Hof breathing method.
Is that
So
the ice water guy?
yeah, Wim Hof. He's amazing, really incredible guy. And Wim Hof breathing's had a really profound effect on me. All of my morning habits and the things like physical practices that really resonate with me, they have in the past, they had an effect on my fatigue so that I could better manage it in the day. And now it's like I wake up and usually I'll drink something like hot tea or coffee with coconut oil in it. And
Coconut oil. Oh, that sounds good.
yeah, and if you use this is real fancy, but not terribly expensive. Might cost maybe $10. If you get a milk frother, and it really blends it together, because I think coconut oil can get kind of intense if it's not well blended. But
I love coconut. I'll start with the oil. See how that does. So I'll let you and Rich chat for a few seconds, and I'll head off and be right back.
Yep, I'm the babysitter today, so I guess that makes me the world. Rich is the new, and Jeff will be the chaos.
When you say coconut oil, do you mean coconut milk?
No, I mean coconut oil. You've never heard of that?
No.
Really?
No.
Okay. In the last like 10 years, it's become a lot more mainstream. And so it's really pretty widely available now. I'm wondering if maybe it's not as common in the UK as the US, but coconuts are pretty fatty. And so you can literally extract the oil from it. There's a process and it's relatively natural. It's not like highly processed like some of the rancid oils like rapeseed oil, things like that, canola oil. It's really not that good for you. Coconut oil actually has a unique property. It's good for people that are trying to lose weight, and it actually helps you stay full, and it releases slow energy. So it's like really sustaining, and helped me with my chronic fatigue when I put it in some hot tea or hot coffee. So I really like it.
I think I probably have come across it. It's just I've probably been ignorant about what it does and what it's for. Not something I've ever looked into, but yeah, okay, cool.
Yeah.
And you said chronic fatigue is that something you still suffer with, or is it something ongoing projects that's kind of got better over time?
I've been very, very fortunate to I actually overcame it last year, just over a year ago. I had chronic fatigue it was gradually onset about ages 13 to 15. By the time I was about 15, it was pretty hardcore. I mean, it's a pretty intense condition. It feels like physical weakness. So it's like this really deep body exhaustion. And I had it from about age 13 to 25. So last year in about February, I got really sick. And I suppose possible it was COVID. That's kind of funny, but I don't know, honestly. I just got really sick and I couldn't really consume very much of anything. And after that, I noticed my fatigue was gone. And I don't think that was the sole turning point. I've been doing a physical therapy called somatic experiencing for 2.5 years now. And I noticed some improvements with the fatigue. And it's a physical therapy specifically for people with PTSD. So it's really has a significant impact on your nervous system. Somatic experiencing. I actually wanted to recommend it to you, Jeff. I think if
my therapist told me there was a book about that he wanted me to read. That's why it sounds familiar.
I can see if I can talk to my practitioner. She's really a very wise person, very incredible person, and she might know somebody in your area. I think she's got a network.
Please do. I have dissociation really, but I have not felt my body in 10 years, and I've been looking for things that get me back into my body, like get that body sensation going again. That might really help.
Well, I did pretty well with the Wim Hof breathing method as far as something that has immediate impact, that's noticeable. And somatic experiencing tends to be subtler, and it's that long-term change that it builds upon itself. And it can be challenging because this practitioner's goal is to help you, or like part of the goal usually is they help you practice observing. So it's kind of meditative, but there's specific ways that they do it. And so it's dealing with the dissociation or the lack of awareness.
Like observing your body? being
Yeah,
aware of your body. Oh yeah,
yeah,
that
yeah.
would
It's very
that's what I
specific
need.
things. Like for example, it's like physical exercises that are very specific that work with the nervous system, and over time it becomes more habitual or instinctive, and you can like work with it. So like something I do that really helps me wake up is eye stretching. So you'll just kind of like you start with, you look around, you just kind of observe your room, and this is called orienting. So you notice, like, you spend time actually visually experiencing your room and like the sense of being in it.
That's
And it's not always easy, and you don't even necessarily know what's going to happen if you have trauma, so it's better to do it with a practitioner. But if you once you do that, you can like push your eyes to kind of the corners of your vision, and it's not as much about seeing as physically feeling literally the stretch of your eyes. And that's something that like helped me wake up. But
I'm trying that now, right?
that's my teeth on edge.
yeah. So like you kind of, and just pay attention to what your reaction is. You kind of like, take care of yourself as you have reactions, because you don't always know what it's going to trigger. And the practitioner is there to help you release that trapped
Oh, I see.
energy. Yeah. And so it can bring up unexpected things. And a lot of it, you literally have to like shake things out. I do that all the
I would
time.
love. I don't know how I didn't hear about this earlier. Actually, I did. My therapist tried to get me.
Well, I've been talking about it for quite a while, so I highly recommend somatic experiencing. It was challenging for me, but it's been really helpful.
How long did you have to do it before you noticed effects?
Uh, it was kind of a roller coaster for me, because a lot of it is dealing with, so like the nature of healing trauma, a lot of it is releasing this energy that's trapped in you. Your nervous system, most mammals have this. They have an escape cycle, and if you can't complete the cycle of escape, you get stuck in that position where there's this trapped energy. It's almost like you have to sneeze and you can't. So then, you sniff some pepper and then it triggers a sneeze. It's kind of like that, but can be kind of dramatic. So I had a lot of ups and downs, and I could tell more and more each time there was like a more dramatic experience where we were kind of moving towards that moment that was like that catharsis, where it would like really release that energy. And it would be like this whole body thing. And now I have a really more ingrained intuition for it. And it kind of feels like it can feel like shivers. Like if you've ever, I don't know, watched a movie where there's this really powerful part of the movie, or heard a speech that's really moving, like I have a dream, and it gives you shivers. That's actually the feeling I would get. So I started to notice those patterns, but you sort of work with the practitioner to lead up to those breakthroughs. So it can be kind of like a roller coaster at times. And then it starts to become more even over time.
I've heard what you've been saying about this. I've heard very similar dialogue. Is my video glitching out, or is it just me? No? I'm okay. I'm okay.
Nope.
Very similar kind of wording with like kind of some traditional Chinese kind of techniques and things like that. So I guess shiatsu's one. Is that Chinese or is that Japanese? Well, anyway, never mind. But it's releasing the blockages of what they would assume, or what the traditional Chinese would call blockages in your qi, in your blood flow, in just like the balance of your energy, whatever you want to call it, because that's up for grabs whether qi exists or not. But it's just the releasing the blockages in your body. And there has been like kind of documentation of, like, as you described, whole body reactions to kind of these unblockages. So I guess it's a similar thing you get in acupuncture as well. It's where the needles kind of eventually unblock these channels. Again, I don't know whether I'm kind of on a level. I love the traditional Chinese kind of Tai Chi and things like that, but there's certain aspects of it I'm very skeptical of. And I am, I guess, at heart a skeptic, because if I hear something, I try not to make And of course, I do make a snap decision because I'm human and that's what we do. But I try not to go with that snap decision. I try to sit back and analyze it from different angles. I guess that travels over into modern life. If you hear something on the news, I got to know both sides of that story. It takes two to tango after all. But yeah, I've heard very similar things to what you've been describing. It's quite interesting how these things kind of overlap. It'd be interesting to find out where what did you say it was? Experience.
Somatic experiencing.
Right.
Yeah, somatic experiencing.
Be interesting to see where the actual origins of that kind of program came from. For me, anyway, that's interesting. Yeah.
The founder of somatic experiencing, the guy that discovered this essentially, his name's Dr. Peter Levine, and he discovered this essentially, if I could give kind of in a nutshell of the history with understanding trauma and the nervous system. There's a lot of breakthroughs in the US and I think in the UK and in a couple places in Europe in the 1960s and 70s. And I'd say one of the main reasons this happened is because there are a lot of war veterans from the Vietnam War in the US that were now being treated, and there was analysis, and there was just that, in a sense, it was an epidemic. The way that they recognized war veterans and PTSD was kind of a novel way of looking at it. And there was this whole renaissance, and there was incredible discoveries in the 70s. And something that I'm really a fierce advocate for is this awareness and the accessibility of trauma therapy, because there's so many people, including medical practitioners, who are absolutely ignorant about what heals trauma. And they assume,
including mental health professionals.
Yeah. They assume that it's PTSD is something you can never heal from. And then they try to prescribe people medications that are actually really damaging to them. And so there's people that deeply suffer for decades because the discoveries in trauma therapy, I'll name a few of the innovators. Dr. Peter Levine is founder of Somatic Experiencing, and there's Dr. Bessel van der Kolk. He wrote a book called The Body Keeps the Score.
That's the one. That's the book my therapist wanted me to read.
Yeah, that's got some similarities with somatic experiencing. And then there's Dr. Stephen Porges founded something called polyvagal theory. That's more of a theory of the healthy nervous system. And all of this stuff's been around for a long time, but there seems to be this weird disconnect where the people that need to know these things are profoundly ignorant. Like, I've had a lot of medical malpractice happen where I'm a high school dropout and I'm telling medical professionals these basic things while I'm trying to get the help I need, and they're dismissing it and saying ignorant things. And so it's a long process. And so I'm really fiercely, as a youth mentor especially, trauma has been a big thing I've focused on. So I want more people to be aware of those things.
Well, we have a few questions from somebody in the chat wanting to know if the somatic experiencing is anything like EMDR, and also, did your camper van make it home?
Whoa. Jeff, do you know who's in the comments at all? Can we tell?
That is John.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Hi, John. My camper van broke down a second time in this last attempt to go get it. We made it 100 miles. We got towed another, 100 miles, and it's sitting in a specialty repair shop for a month before they can even get to it. It's kind of chaotic. Yeah, the whole industry's backed up because it's so popular right now. But that's a whole other can of worms. But so somatic experiencing, I would say, is much better than EMDR. EMDR to me is a discovery that was independent. That's like a small piece of the puzzle, and it's very specific. And I think EMDR can be effective, but I would say somatic experiencing, or possibly spiral model therapy that Dr. Bessel van der Kolk founded, both of those have similarities, and I would say they're more all-encompassing and they're more advanced in like some of these discoveries. So you can certainly shop around and try things out, but in my experience, even like working with my friends, family, or even clients I've had when they're seeking help, EMDR tends to be very slow moving. And a lot of EMDR specialists tend to be very, very hesitant and overly cautious. So to me, it's almost as if they have a toolkit with only one tool, whereas somatic experiencing and spiral model practitioners tend to have a much wider depth of tools. But I mean, just try things out and see what happens, and don't necessarily just take my word for it.
Well, thank you for that. I know with trauma, every potential thing is useful. So
Yeah. Well, yeah, I want to be a little bit careful because with the popularity of victimhood these days as a cultural phenomenon, I've worked with a lot of people that claim to have trauma, which to some extent I think is true, but they're also lying. So they're like pretending certain things are traumatizing that aren't. So that's a whole big mess.
That's the semantic creep that's happening with the woke. The definition of trauma is and harm and stuff is being spread to cover everything. But trauma, the way I use it, is what you said. It affects the nervous. There's actual physical effects on the nervous system. So if somebody called you a wrong pronoun and it affected your nervous system on that level, then I guess that's trauma. I'm just skeptical that that's what's happening inside of you when you hear a pronoun. But
yeah.
I confine trauma in my work to the mainly PTSD. Like the whole brain is changed, the amygdala, the hippocampus, all of that, and that's a very specific. I use very specific techniques for that, and it's I forgot what I was gonna say, but anyway, it's that's what I know is trauma. So when I hear the word trauma, I have to make sure that we're talking about the same thing with people lately.
Yeah, it can be disorienting because there are people that where it's popular to talk about trauma now, but they're really ignorant about it. And I had to work with a lot of those people. So then they're creating misinformation. And then there's also the kind of archaic culture and system that's completely divorced from the discoveries in the world of healing trauma. So it's the issue of separate silos is what that is called, when there's different disciplines that should be building bridges between each other that end up isolated. So honestly, like it's almost like we've come full circle in this episode of the podcast where the theme of isolation, and it's almost like segregation in these little bubbles where people are just not intermingling very much. So their experience of reality is very different, and it makes it much harder to determine what's really happening. Like even someone like myself that's really proactive, I've basically decided I need to leave my house every day and go around and just see what's actually happening and talk to people and listen to them, because it's so difficult to determine what people's experiences actually are.
Yeah. Rich, is there anything you want to wrap up with? We're coming up on the hour.
I'm going to throw this one at you. And it's kind of got to do with the harm thing and the trauma, although it's a very different. I guess it kind of ties in with, Jeff, what you said about people conflating like trauma with harm, but not quite. And it's a good. This comes from a good place. So I don't know if you've ever seen the kind of, I don't know what you'd call it, infomercial advert where a woman is explaining to her daughter about name calling and things like that. So she's got a piece of paper and gets her child to call it a bad name or something, and she scrunches at the paper. And she calls it another bad name, and she scrunches it up more. And then when she's finished, she opens it up and spreads it out. And it's all crinkled. And she says to her daughter, "No, is that the same as it was when you began?" And the daughter kind of, "No." And then she kind of clicks that calling people bad names hurts them. Now, my friend, colleague, call them what you will, said that she did this with her child. And she had finished telling me this, and my instant reaction was, right, go back, do that again. And when you've opened up the piece of paper, make a paper airplane out of that and make sure your daughter knows that it can still fly. That was just an instant reaction from me. So I want to know from you guys, is there something there? Can we take that somewhere? That sort of metaphor of like, even though you've had these little digs and dins, I guess it's about resilience and resistance to kind of these little
post-traumatic growth too.
There you go.
Yes.
Yeah.
My answer would be the airplane doesn't have a choice. If it's an airplane and it's traumatized and it's dented and all that, it still has to fly. It can sit on the shelf and not do anything. Or at some point, it's if it's designed to fly or designed to be human or live life, at some point it has no choice. It can stay stuck in the trauma, or it can move forward out of the trauma. Those are the two options. So it's not, can the plane fly? If the paper is going to do anything at all, that's the only choice it can do. And so at some point, sometimes the body and the mind naturally kind of gets you there or towards there, but then there's things you can do to help it and kind of direct and manage that flight, or whatever we're calling it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. My point was, I was trying to get across that even though these harms have happened, these traumas have happened, as you quite rightly said,
Resilient, yeah.
As you quite rightly said, that if it's a plane, then it's got to fly. So even with all these things happening, it's still able to function. Yeah. So it's not so much. It was. I guess what got me is that she ended it with a crumpled piece of paper. It's like, well, that's not the end of the story. What happens now? What happens next? Do you let that crumpled piece of paper be your life, or do you make something new? Do you learn from that experience, or do you let it control you? Back to like Nemo, you were saying about, you people don't control me. You can't control my thoughts. Get out my way. I'm coming through.
You ain't the boss of this.
Exactly. But yeah, I thought I'd check that one in because I thought that just now. I was like, oh, let's try that one out, see if it works.
I like that one, especially for its potentials for demonstrating victimhood, like you said. Because if you stay with the crumpled paper and end it there, you're staying in victimhood. But there are other steps or other things you can do with the paper beyond that point. And I think that's where we all have the potential to come in.
Yeah. Actually, I think there's so much to that. It's such a simple thing, but there's so much potential in how you interpret it. And it inspires creativity for me. And something it reminds me of, and this is going to be a little esoteric and kind of a curveball, but I try to point out to people. So part of my philosophy with self-determination is that I regard it as a form of true intrinsic wealth. So I regard, like, I'll literally try to measure wealth by a person's degree of self-determination. So like, how much is their autonomy something that's actualized in life, and not just that they're making random choices, but they're conscious about it, they're aware, and they're making wise choices. They're more integrated. They're not man versus himself constantly. And then likewise, how competent and skillful are they? And then how are the quality of their relationships? And so when I look for those cues and try to measure that, to me, that's measuring true intrinsic wealth. And a lot of people tend to assume that wealth and poverty are measured only by materials and resources and money. So are these things that are outside of us. And I think it's to some degree arbitrary, and that how you recognize and define a material or a resource also depends on you. And so if we're looking at the piece of paper, if you have a person that is highly creative and independent and intrinsically motivated, so they have some of those good qualities of autonomy and competence, and they're in a really tough situation, they could probably come up with 10 different ways to use that piece of paper that will have a profound impact on getting through that situation. But if they are stuck in this victimhood experience where they themselves are like a crumpled piece of paper, and they stay that way, then it doesn't matter what the piece of paper is. It doesn't matter if they have all the paper in the world. If they don't use it right, to them, it's just going to be a burden, or it's going to be nothing. So it depends on your internal state, and that I want people to realize that.
That's so funny. I just remembered I wrote a poem about feeling like a crumpled sheet of paper back when I was at the gifted school, and they put it in the literary journal, and I drew a little drawing to go with it of crumpled up paper next to a trash can. That all came back to me. So.
Well,
I have to go back and find the poem and see if I did anything beyond just being a crumpled paper and saw any potential from that.
Yeah.
Well, we are just about on the hour, so we can, if anybody has any closing thoughts they want to wrap up with.
I'd just like to say thank you very much for having me on. And awesome.
Rich, I had a blast. This was.
We'll do it again soon.
Yeah.
This was awesome.
And we have the Discord and we have the other weekly Zooms, so there's plenty of opportunities to continue this.
Yeah, with the like the weekly Zooms, I tend to the last couple of weeks I've been dropping in every 2 weeks because that's how my time.
Oh yeah, that's fine. They're dropping.
Yeah, they've been really cool. But
people come and go.
Yeah. Well, I can just kind of remind anybody who's actually listening and here with us. Hello, welcome. We do this podcast every Saturday. Sometimes for our UK guests, we move it 1 or 2 hours earlier, like we did today. And so, that's usually roughly midday or afternoon for most of the US time zones, or it's in the evening time for UK. And if anybody wants to contact us, that's jeffandnemo@gmail.com, or you can comment in our channel or join us for the live chat. I'm pretty active in Counterweight, and I think Rich is reasonably active there too. And we have our Discord group that kind of combines a bunch of these different groups called Critical Crossroads. So if you want to get active and you want to meet people, if you have a cool idea, there's something you really want to build, create, whatever, and if anything today inspired you, please get connected with us. We want people like you to be part of the crew. We're gonna be doing some cool things. I guarantee it. I'm not giving up.
Well, Rich, thank you again.
Thank you so much.
Have a good week, and we'll see you soon.
Yeah, I'll speak to you soon.
Thanks, Rich.
Thanks so much.